All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and this is the City of Minnetrista's work session for May 2nd. It's 5:30. So first order, I will do introductions. We have our Public Works Superintendent, Gary Peters, with us. Also, City Clerk, Don Mosco. Council members present are Kathleen Refkin, Ann McGregor, Pam Mortensen. I'm Lisa Whalen. I'm the mayor. John Chumperlin is absent this evening. And then also we have Jasper Krugel, Administrator, Finance Director, Brian Grimm, and Chief of Police, Paul Falls. With that, we have two items on our agenda, the Police Department gun range discussion, and then next our ARPA allocations discussion. So we'll start with the police. Jasper? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, we're going to just have a discussion, I've done an analysis of where we're at with the Minnetrista Police Department gun range discussion, gathering information. I just want to talk with the City Council about this and get some direction as far as what staff's working on, what the next steps are, things of that nature. So, Chief Falls is here as well to chime in, and he's has all the institutional knowledge. But basically, in the memo I provided, I just wanted to provide the lay of the land. You know what's going on, and outline a process to evaluate the potential development of that facility. Really, I'll start off. I'll just use the memo as guidance, is talk about the fundraising efforts, because really that's where from what I understand, what we're trying to accomplish is to get the Crime Prevention Fund to fund the facility, and that's generally the initial capital investment to put in to build the facility itself and all the amenities that are in it. Chief Falls, myself, I believe Mayor Whalen, to some extent, we've tried to reach out to the Crime Prevention Fund to garner a meeting. From my understanding, they have a golf event that's coming up that consumes a lot of their time. We're anticipating sometime after that golf event that we'll actually be able to sit down and talk to the group and talk about the fundraising efforts, and if they're interested in prioritizing this facility in their fundraising efforts. And I'll just note a couple things with that. What I would look for in the group, with the group, is to get a fundraising agreement. That's essentially an agreement between the City of Minnetrista and the Crime Prevention Fund that they are going to prioritize our fundraising and set up some goals with that. There really isn't any teeth behind that, nothing that we can go after them, but it's just a public relations, maybe a press release of some sort that we can say, yep, we're working on this together, and now we're fundraising for this event or for this facility. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to have a meeting with that group here in the next probably, I think the golf event is June 13th?
June, I want to say it's sooner than that. June 3rd, I think.
June 3rd. So sometime after that, once things settle down with that, we're hopeful we'll get a meeting and we'll be able to talk to the group. So that's the first step in this whole process, is determining if there's funding, because from what I've gathered from conversations with staff and some city council members, is that if there isn't that funding component, it's likely not going to happen, as there's no appetite to fund it ourselves using taxpayer money. So that's the first step in this process, is to determine if that group is still interested. From what I gathered, they were maybe 3 years ago or so, in prioritizing our facility in their fundraising efforts. So the idea is, once we can get a meeting, we'll report back to City Council on the status of that meeting and see where we're at as far as the fundraising efforts go. The next thing I want to talk about is the public use requirement, and I've had some conversations with our legal counsel on this as far as...
Hold on.
Oh, go ahead.
Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward. So, just checking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Public use requirements. So there's been a little bit of back and forth with this. There is some pretty clear language in state statute that requires us to open the facility up to, it says, Minnesota Department of Natural Resource Youth Firearm Safety Training. So that's very clear. There's also state statute, another section that says that we need to open it up to the public. For public use, I forget the language that they use, but it's very general. It doesn't exactly say, it needs to be 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week. So I know there's been research that looks at other publicly funded facilities and what their hours are. And in general, on average, those hours are about 15 hours a week is what you'll see. And you'll see in some of the cost analysis that 15 hours is what was used. We don't know if we say, we're only going to be open for 8 hours a week, 10 hours a week. That'd be a policy decision made by City Council as far as what the expectations are. We've had some conversations about, well, what does that actually mean if we're open? It'd be nice to be able to say, yep, we're available to be open these hours, but if you want to use the range, you actually schedule time, and then we can allocate resources accordingly to kind of limit the amount of time that we potentially have somebody there when nobody's shooting. So that would obviously help. So as we, later on in this discussion, as we go through the cost analysis, keep that in mind. The costs that you're seeing are I call them conservative, and there's ways that we can, get those to be lower. But I didn't want to come in with a number that I've developed that's super low, assuming a bunch of things. So know that there's ways to work on it and things like that. So, but the police use or the public use requirement, we have the firearm safety training classes to just be open to that, and then to be open to the public for a certain amount of time. So those things are expected. What those hours are would be set by City Council.
Well, I think we've always talked about we would want to make it available to the public because then it would be a community amenity as well as an amenity for the police department. And I think if we can meld those two together, it's not just for the police. So I've always been open to having it open to the public. How many hours, we can determine that. The other thing is we also, and you'll probably get to that with other, okay, that's all.
If the DNR uses it for the gun safety training, do they pay us? Do they get to use it for free? How does that work?
By state statute, we are allowed to charge a fee. Again, it's not very specific, but it would have to be some reasonable fee, but we would be allowed to charge something for the use of that.
Okay.
And the other thing is, too, if we open it up for gun safety, whether it's through the DNR or some other program, I don't know, maybe then the Crime Prevention Fund would kick in some fund for that, because I know they've been a little bit leery in the past to fund things. For education, they like to do that. Mm-hmm. So that might be an opportunity as well.
Correct.
So.
Yep, and there's a lot of, I'll call them fun items that we could discuss as far as the business plan goes. How are we going? What are some revenue generating items that we can talk about and market and do and go down those paths? I don't really. They're great ideas. I don't know if we're quite there yet. We need to make sure the facility is funded before we can really. So that's kind of the next step. But we have a lot of ideas on how we can generate revenue to kind of make up the gap in what the maintenance costs are for just operations and then capital item depreciation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Questions? Okay.
And then, so the next piece is the type of gun range. So talking with Chief Falls, I know that there was a presentation on this, so I didn't really spend much time on it. But the preferred gun range is the encapsulator block trap system with the Viper live fire virtual training system. One thing that Chief Falls and myself are going to look at are that Viper live fire virtual training system. That I think had an estimated cost of an additional $50,000. Something like that could be phased in, as far as the fundraising goes. The one piece that I'm interested in that I don't know the information on is, are there similar facilities with this type of kind of system that maybe would make ours a little bit more marketable to be regionally attractive to other police departments, maybe some training events through conceal and carry classes or things of that nature. If it's something that's more marketable, we could look at it. But I know from a police training standpoint, it's very attractive because it really helps you get more real world scenario training events in a gun range. So that would be the preferred system.
Can I ask a question, Chief? Would that then be a draw for other police departments? I'm just going to say, for instance, West Hennepin, for instance, or even Delano. I don't know how far, but would that be a draw for them to come here and do that?
Madam Mayor and Council, yes, absolutely. The live fire FAT system is essentially it's a step above what we use now, where we rent this screen, and it's got a computer that projects video onto a screen, and then you use basically a computer simulated gun or firearm to shoot at that. It's not real rounds or anything. This would be the next level of that type of training. So you'd be firing live rounds in a range with that same type of system with your actual duty weapon, not some simulation. And so that's the piece that I think we could market to a lot of agencies. It's not, that's relatively new technology, and I don't think there's a lot of that around, but we'd have to, when we get to that step, we'd have to research and figure out exactly who has that and who doesn't.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of them around. But I think agencies around here for sure would be interested in that piece, even if they weren't interested in using the general range.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I have one question on that. I know this is down the road.
It's your eyes, don't worry.
With that program, there would be, I'm sure, technical updates. You might want to find out how often would that happen and the
That's a
cost
good
of
point,
that.
yeah.
Because that always is like, oh, by the way, after the fact kind of thing.
Right, that's a good point. And certainly that would be part of the conversation up front with the vendor.
It's a ghost.
Yep, and I do have, we'll fast forward a little bit, I do have that in the depreciation for a 10-year lifespan. So we do have it accounted for, but yeah, as far as getting the exact numbers, yeah, once we get to that point, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So the type of gun range is what we would prefer here is described in this section. The next are the annual operating costs. So I just kind of wanted to go through this a little bit, and I maybe took a different approach at looking at this compared to what was previously done. Again, I try to be conservative in these things just so that, down the road, in my mind, this is, if this potentially does happen, we're talking 2 years down the road, you'll likely see some jumps in both equipment costs and labor costs. So having conservative numbers to kind of have realistic expectations is important. So the operating cost estimate, so these are things just to operate the facility. So the HVAC operation and maintenance, so that's filters, that's electricity, those are things that were identified in a previous PowerPoint, estimated at about $9,000 per year. Now, keep in mind that this number is fluid with the amount of use that you're seeing in the facility. So if you see less use, you're going to see less dollar amount here. If you're going to see more use than what was determined as far as the hours go, then you'll see more dollars. So this is kind of the best guess at this time without really having a business plan. The Durablock replacement, so this is including labor and disposal, and that's assuming police usage mostly with some public use. That's $10,000 per year. And then the staffing component, which you'll see is the largest operating cost out of the three components here, at 15 hours a week, 780 hours annually at $45 an hour, which is a blend between the CSO range and the police officer range. That comes out to $35,000, $35,100. One thing I will note is that when we talk to other agencies, and if we would get to that point and we would develop agreements, one of the components would be, hey, do you have staff time in lieu of cash to come staff this? Because that's the biggest component out of the operating costs that are not capital related. So keep that in mind, and scaling back the staffing, 15 hours a week, I think at first would be pretty high. That of actual usage, but as it becomes, the community becomes more accustomed to it being available, you might see it get up there. So know that this is a conservative estimate, but we wanted to throw out, numbers that we likely wouldn't exceed immediately.
And we don't need staffing when the police use it.
That is
No,
correct.
That's correct. Yep, we can take care of ourselves.
I just want to be sure.
I have another question on that. The $45 an hour is really high to have somebody just staff to, stand there basically. Is there a requirement for somebody to be qualified to do that job?
There isn't like a licensure to be a range attendant. I think, from what I understand, is our police department would like to have the police officers be the ones to do it. We could look at hiring a different, I don't know, in my mind it's like a CSO type position when that's a lower wage. but making sure that they're familiar with gun ranges. I know there's a few in the area, but I think it would be up to Chief Falls and ultimately City Council if they feel comfortable with somebody other than a police officer being in the facility and managing it. So I think it'd be preferred if it's an officer, but if there's ways around that can maybe reduce that rate, sure, we could definitely look at it.
Chief?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I don't think it has to necessarily be a police officer. Certainly they have to have some basic level of firearms knowledge. Several of our officers are firearms instructors, including myself, so that would certainly be a good start. The $45 an hour, I think, kind of includes benefits and things too. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're taking home. That just covers all of the expenses that go into putting an employee there. But many ranges pay far less than that to their employees. So once we get to that level, we can certainly dive into that piece, because I think there's a way to staff that without using police officers that would be a reasonable rate. There's probably a number of people that have the expertise and would be more than willing to work on a part-time basis.
Or even if one of our CSO officers wanted to work at in addition to his regular 40 hours, but as a separate, I don't know, in lower wage, you know what I'm saying? If they said, well, I'll do evenings or something like that, and I don't know if you can do that, but
Yeah, we'll have to look into that piece.
Yeah, we'd have to look at. because the CSO is a union employee, and
I was saying if it was outside of that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, these are all great ideas. I think if this does happen, we would definitely look at ways to be as cost effective as possible.
Right. Okay.
And
then
making sure.
So when the public is there, we could look at our expenses and then say, well, let's just say one person there is $45 an hour. Couldn't we look at our expenses and then say, well, we're going to have to charge $75 an hour, something like that, so that those are covered?
I think we'd run into issues because we have to look at, I don't know if I have that slide with me, but if we looked, in one of the presentations I did, I gave a range of what other ranges are charging.
Oh, okay.
And it's not very much. They're charging about $15 to $28 or $30 per, I think that was an hour or maybe 45 minutes.
Okay.
And so if you start to ramp that cost up too high, nobody's going to want to use it.
Okay.
But
Then we should look at how we can staff it for the public at lower than $45 an hour.
Right, and I think those are things that we'll get into,
Yeah.
certainly if we get to the point where we know this is going to happen.
Okay.
Then we can really dive into that.
Okay.
I think my recommendation certainly would be meet that statutory requirement for public use right away, because we're required to, but you can always ramp up from there. Start at the minimum and kind of get our feet wet. There's all kinds of rules and best practices that go along with the operation of ranges. And so we would dive into what those are and what would apply here. And then based on that, we could determine who would be best suited to staff that range. At this point, I just can't answer that.
Okay.
Well, one other thing I will note is I did reach out to the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust to see if there would be any additional cost to having a gun range on our facility, and they indicated that there is not. It's covered under our general liability umbrella. They do have some best practices like rules and things like that they request that we post at the gun range, but there isn't at this time any additional premium that we would have to pay in our insurances for this. So that was an important piece, because that could be depending on the amenity. If you have a skateboard park that has a bowl that's deeper than 4 feet, you got to pay a premium because it's more dangerous. So in this case, we don't have to pay a premium. So that was a bonus, because I thought maybe we would.
One other quick
Yeah.
question. Paul, when do the police use the range like this? Is it during the weekdays, during the day, or do they use it after evening? Because the public would, I would think, be geared to using it more in the evening and weekends.
Sure, that's a good question, but certainly we're flexible. A lot of the idea would be if this range gets completed, rather than bringing all of our staff in like we do now on a particular date and time, we would spread it out and you just shoot at the first hour or two of your shift or end of your shift, so we don't have to pay any overtime. And then that would just take place over the course of days. So we never really have to pool everybody up, and it allows us to do a couple of things. Cut down or eliminate most of the overtime, and then it's always more effective and efficient when you can train people more often for a shorter period of time, rather than just because we have a date out there and it's misting and it's miserable. Well, we have this time, so you're gonna come out here and shoot for 3 hours, and that's just the way it is. So I think we'd be much more effective, but we can work around that. So, for example, if we decided to have this open for a period of time on Saturdays and Wednesday evenings, we would just avoid those times for police training.
So I have a question on history, okay? I remember our orientation trip around there and how the gun range was built into the building, but why Minnetrista? What do all the other cities around us do with their police training? What do they do?
That's a good question. So South Lake has their own range in the building that they built, and I can't remember if they built that building before ours or after ours. I want to say it was shortly after.
I think it was shortly after.
And that's a little bit different animal because they're a joint powers. And so they built before the public requirement was there. And theirs is completely in the basement. It's not really accessible to the public because you have to walk through their space to get to it. Other than them, they're the only one I know that has their own range. So we train at the Minnetonka Sportsman's Club. Orono trains there as well. And they have a lot of the same frustrations that we do. And they have almost double the amount of officers we do. So our frustrations are doubled for them because it takes so much more time to train that amount of staff. West Hennepin uses Delano Gun Club, which is an outdoor range. I'm not sure what Carver County does because that's just a whole separate system from us. I could certainly find out when we get to that piece. But and there are some public safety ranges like the one in Edina. That's a joint effort. I think it's Airport, Bloomington, Richfield, Eden Prairie. They also have fire training facilities on the same premise. That's a very different facility than this. It's enormous. They have 2 ranges on there, lots of lanes, and it's utilized for all kinds of training for both police and fire. But that was built jointly together by all of those organizations. You can rent it, but again, we run into now we're paying the rent and then we're spending an enormous amount of time on overtime because we have to travel to and from. And so we kind of discussed that, I think, in one of the early presentations. So for us, it's more efficient just to shoot here. But as the gun club continues to gain in its membership, I think our frustrations are just going to continue to compound.
You're saying the one out here.
Yeah, the Minnetonka Sportsman's Club. They've been good partners, but there are limitations because of their range. They have rules, and we don't just get to do what we want because we're the police. There are restrictions and limitations there. And the biggest constraint is just the time. We have to pick the range dates a year in advance, and then that's what you get. So we usually pick 1 or 2 extra just because of weather. If it's misting, we'll shoot anyway. If it's pouring rain, we'll cancel it and just go back to the next available date.
I put this out on Nextdoor over the weekend because I really do think that we should have lots and lots of resident input with lots and lots of resident questions. The positives were revolving around education and in particular kids. And I think that's really, really important too. The negatives, there were lots of negatives. The negatives had to do with it's not something for all of Minnetrista.
Right.
And that they felt it should be funded privately. There were other people who just didn't like the idea at all, and then on liability was one issue, and so the biggest thing was, well, why Minnetrista? Why not another city around here, and what do they do? And that's why I asked that question.
Sure.
Are there other police stations like Orono or whatever that have facilities that they're waiting to develop into gun ranges, or is this the only one?
This is the only one. So that's a very good point. So first and foremost, why Minnetrista? Because we built that facility with that purpose. And it's a very specific design. It's useless for anything else because there were very strict and specific standards for a gun range. So for example, the roof is all Spancrete. The walls are a certain thickness. They're all filled, so you can't just convert it to office space. Or, I mean, I suppose you could make a driving range out of it, but short of that, it really doesn't work for anything but a gun range because it's built very specifically for that purpose.
And that was done at that time because you knew in the future you were going to need it. You just what?
The extra cost to do that at the time was minimal,
Right.
if you will.
Right.
And
It
so-
cost pennies to build then compared to what it would cost to start from
Right.
scratch today. And I think I wasn't part of that process when we were building that building. I was a patrol supervisor, so I was certainly heard about it and things, but I wasn't directly involved in it. But I do know that the anticipation of the challenges we were having even then, it was trying to look forward and address some of the training needs that we'd have in the future.
And the other thing, it was even back then thought, well, we would seek private donations to
Right.
build it out. So that's kind of been all along the idea, to use private donations to finish off the space. But we thought it was pennies on the dollar, so to speak, to do that now versus having to do it later, not knowing what might be coming down in terms of training requirements too.
So as we go forward, on the line of the negatives, I think it was mainly that people didn't want their taxes to be increased for something that they may not use at all. And I think that we have to address that, and we have to address how much Minnetrista would be paying versus other areas, which you and I talked about this morning. And so I think we first have to find out whether or not the crime prevention fund people are even going to help. And if they do, then cross the other bridges.
Well, I think that's a good point. What I was looking at is what is the amenity to our police department? That's the first and foremost. What's the value there? The other amenity, of course, like you said, doesn't address everybody in the community because not everybody's going to want to use it. So that portion, I think, would have to be paid for by those that use it.
Right.
That's fine. So we'll have to figure something out there. But I also think we have to put a value on it for our police. And that's kind of what I would be looking at.
Mayor, I think to that point, that's a very good point. And I think when people say, well, I'm not going to use this, so I don't want to pay for it, I think that's a valid point. Certainly we need to address it. But I think if we take a step back and look at a more global picture of what are we trying to do here, I don't think you can put a value on good police training. And I think that's invaluable to everybody, regardless of whether you come here and you like to shoot a gun or not. That's the piece that's the most important to me. So from that perspective, I think there's value for everyone. And I think it's really, really important. Just given the environment that law enforcement is in and the scrutiny they're under, I think it's important that we try to continue to progress and do absolutely everything we can to make sure that our people are trained adequately for what they're facing. So from that perspective, I think we can sell value to everyone.
And I'm going to probably ask you, this question is for the record more than anything else.
Right.
And I'm probably going to ask it every single time this comes up because I think that it needs to be said again. Everybody who hears this for the first time or second time says, but there are lots and lots of gun ranges around. Why don't they go to those gun ranges? Didn't you say at one point that the gun ranges have to be shut down while the police are there or something to that effect? I mean, why, in other words, why wouldn't you go to Stock and Barrel?
Yes, that's a good question. So Stock and Barrel is a private range. They're in the business of making money. That's why they built the place. Certainly, if we were to call them up and say, hey, we'd like to train there once in a while, would they rent space to us? Yes, they probably would. I haven't asked them specifically, but I know other ranges would do that. But there's a cost to that. The biggest challenge for us is, again, we have to pay overtime. So anything that's not really close to here is going to cost us more than what we're paying today because we can go outside. It's not ideal, but we can do it, and it's in our city. So at least it's close. When we start traveling outside of the city, now I have to start paying overtime for the travel piece to and from. So it just increases that cost exponentially. And there are limitations on that.
And also, what if the private range is closed? Like, what if Stock and Barrel closes? Or the Minnetonka Gun Club closes, then where do they go? it's just helping keep our police ready, best able to do their job, and keeping it close so they can do it here without having to travel. And then you don't put weather into play either, which is very important. Plus, it'll help us recruit. I would assume it would help us recruit more officers because you can use it as a selling point.
Yeah, the piece, especially with new officers, training new officers, that piece would be magnificent to have this range, because now we don't, if we don't know the exact start date or if someone's going to leave, well, those range dates are already set a year in advance. So what we have to do now when we hire this next officer is we'll go out there, and if there's a bunch of people on the range, we'll just have to try and mix in with them, which isn't very efficient, because then we can't just say, hey, we're going to go up here to this 7-yard line, you guys come up here. I mean, we can't take over the range, they're paying members. So in that case, we'll just go away and come back another day and hope it's not busy. So it's very inefficient. We have, from time to time, tried to go over to South Lake and supplement that, but that's difficult because then they have to have someone there for us, and if they don't have anyone available, it just creates a lot of issues. So having that space and the flexibility to be able to train as we need to in a concise time frame is really important. Probably more importantly, when this range, if it's finished the way we want to finish it, this range will allow us to do a lot of things you can't do in any of those ranges, like stock and barrel or out on the Minnetonka Sportsman Club, because this range, essentially, you can obviously shoot at the end of the range, but you can also shoot along the sides of the range. So being able to turn and fire and draw and fire and then have things projecting up there is something that is really law enforcement specific. That's not something you're going to find anywhere but at a law enforcement range. So that's a capability we're just not going to find somewhere else.
Okay. Good. Anything else?
Well, you can see in here just the capital outlay depreciation, to replace the items such as HVAC and the training system, which is projectors, things like that. And there's this kind of a placeholder for facility items. I've always been of the nature, if you have a window, it'll eventually break sometime, and we'll have to replace it. So some of those things are included in there. Total, I'd say the top end of annual operation and capital outlay cost estimate is just under $70,000, which in conversations with Chief Falls, depending on what city council, and it's kind of one of the tasks or one of the things, we don't need to talk about it tonight, but as a city council member, you have to, if you are in support of something like this, well, what's the annual amount that you feel is appropriate for the benefit that is received? And just kind of think about that, start thinking about that, because if this does get legs, there will be some maintenance costs. Know that we'll develop a business plan that involves, possibly other police agencies, paying something, paying their fair share. So that'll supplement this annual operating cost. But no doubt there will be some annual operating cost, and just to be conscious and thinking about that actively as a council member, what you feel might be appropriate, if that time comes, if we make it through the subsequent steps before we have that real conversation. So briefly, just revenue generating opportunities. We have the marketing to the public. That's important, and then we have the regional police departments that we can try to get agreements with. And really from, the most feasible one is Orono. The other ones are supplementing their facilities that they use. Carver County is the wild card because they're such a big agency, and we don't know if they need to supplement, and they're looking for different areas. But really, Orono, it'd be an Orono Minnetrista facility. They'd be the primary users, I think.
Watertown have their own police department? No, they're Carver. So it's sheriffs, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Independence maybe, depending on, because they do outdoor, right?
They do outdoor, although I'm not sure they'd be very interested in spending. It depends on what the cost would be.
Yeah.
But they're a smaller agency,
They're a small
so their
agent,
cost
yeah.
would be less.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Orono's bigger, so they
Right.
would utilize it probably more than we do.
Right.
They have double the amount of officers, so their cost would be more.
How about Laconia?
That's Carver.
That's
County
Carver
Sheriff's
too,
Office.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, everything in Carver County does, it's a Carver County sheriff, yeah.
Everything but Chaska.
Chaska.
Chaska, yeah.
It's
Okay.
a little different animal.
Yep. So I'm personally excited if we get to that point to develop a business plan for the facility where we can kind of look and get people involved, get letters of commitment, things of that nature, to really look at what our cost potentially could be as a city. There's, I think, a couple logical steps before that. So moving forward, the next steps that you'll see us working on, and really I'm looking for affirmation that, hey, we're going down the right path here as a staff, so you know what we're working on and we're trying to complete your goals. This will be something that I'm sure we talk about during our strategic planning session. But moving forward, we're going to attempt to get a meeting with the Crime Prevention Fund and maybe get them to come to a city council meeting work session and talk about their wants or their needs as an organization, and ultimately try to get them to commit to a fundraising agreement with the city of Minnetrista for the facility. If that doesn't happen, I'll take direction from city council as far as next steps, but from what I've gathered, it ends there for the time being. So that's just the next steps. It sounds like we're going down the right path from the conversations that we've had, and there will be more to come once we get that initial meeting with the Crime Prevention Fund, and we'll report back. It might be timely. I'm not sure. It'd be nice to be able to do it. I think we've settled in on a potential strategic planning date of June 20th, I believe. So, ideally, we could have a meeting before then, and maybe we can use that to leverage a meeting. So to report back at that time. So this has been a good conversation. If there's any other questions, myself and Chief Falls can entertain them. But that's all I have tonight.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
ARPA allocations.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council. So this came out of our last meeting. Suggested to have this on the work session to more pin down where we want to put our funds. I notated in the memo here. I did file the report for the 4:30 deadline here for basically our zero report, because I think we haven't allocated and had the eligible projects be completed, or even some of the contracts we're still even getting into on some of the different areas. So the report was filed, and the main thing there was that we did take the standard allowance for revenue loss, which sort of does open up the ability to use roads and some other operations, where before, if you don't take that, it had to be more specifically used for broadband and utilities type items, water, sewer. So I think that gives us some flexibility. So we did do that. As far as I know we had talked about this earlier in the year with the broadband discussion, as far as how to fund that $400,000 city contribution. And I think back at the time, before we knew we were going to get the county dollars, we had done $255,000 to ARPA and the $145,000 of this cable fund. I think that some of that had to do with business subsidies,
Right.
rules, or whatever. So, so what staff is suggesting is just taking that $200,000 from the county and reducing our ARPA allocation there down to $55,000 from the initial discussion.
You have it in the packet a little weird, because you have ARPA portion of contribution $255. It should actually be $55, and then the city's portion is $145 on page 6.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I
kind
did
of
notice
odd,
that too. I think
the way it's written, so it's not.
Yeah,
it's
no,
not quite true.
I saw. Yeah, I was working with this on Alley, and when I was reading it a little after the fact here, I saw after the packet had gone out, it basically it should have almost been subtracted versus
Right.
added in. Or
Exactly,
whatever. So
yeah.
It's a little different, but yeah, but the gist of it is basically that the broadband would just be $55,000 out of our ARPA.
One thing, though, we've had some inquiries. So there's 495 homes that are being serviced now or will be serviced by Midco, and we were hoping that would cover everybody then in the city. It does not. There's like a handful. I mean, it's like 6 or 8 people or properties, maybe 10 or 12. I mean, it's not very many that won't be serviced. And so I asked Allie if she could check with Midco to find out if they could extend. They said they probably wouldn't because of the cost, but I asked her to find out if they would be willing to do, if we did a larger percentage of the cost, so that we can get everybody serviced either with Midco or MediaCom, and then we would be done. And so I don't know where she's at with that, but So I'm just saying, maybe we would want to, we can put the money into the road fund now, but we might want to think about taking a little bit of it out later and putting it towards the broadband. Now, the other thing we can do is if we had a separate agreement with them for that portion, we could still take more money out of our
Cable fund.
cable fund, right. We were limited to the 150 because of that. Otherwise, we'd have to do a business plan. But if we had a separate agreement,
Oh, a second one.
yeah,
Okay.
second agreement, we might be able to take, for that portion, we might be able to take more out of the cable fund too.
Okay.
So kind of keep that in mind. I think it would be really bad if there's like just a handful of people that are left.
I agree.
Yeah. So she's
Where-
checking on it, and I don't know where she's at with that, but maybe check back with us.
There's a meeting scheduled.
Okay.
I know they've been going back and forth on getting that done, but they are going to give us an answer at some point in time here in the near future.
Okay.
Where are the
So
handful of homes?
if you look at a map, the Midco is coming down 15, and they're going to be stopping, I can't tell you exact where, but short of West Edge and short of Dutch View. And so if Dutch View has nothing, and there's like 5 or 6 homes there, and then if you go down West Edge, I don't think West Edge has any either. Just a couple of homes. Is that your understanding too?
It is, yeah. There's a couple little branches off of there that they didn't get capture in their design map.
Right.
Likely because there's only a couple properties down each one. And
Right. And
trying
so
to-
they probably didn't want to extend it because of the density. But if we can use our cable fund for that and maybe increase our percentage, even if it's 50% or something like that, and then use a little bit of our broadband fund, then maybe that could help cover that.
Yeah, because that particular location that you're describing, I think I had 1 or 2 houses come running out of the houses asking for help.
Probably.
So it would be good to finish the project.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so my recommendation is keep this for now.
Sure.
And then put the money in roads, whatever, knowing that we might have to transfer a little bit of that out of the roads. So.
Yeah,
just-
that's fine.
yeah.
And I think I mentioned in the memo, so basically we'll be filing this report in April of 2023. I know we sort of
Okay.
want to have the funds allocated, so it helps even just when we do the quarterly reports, we know what our cash balances are and what we got allocated, and it's good to pin down. So yeah, I guess I know we talked about potentially bringing a transfer to one of these next meetings. I mean, would you like to do that as a council? And then if we need to shift a little money back, you just do a subsequent
Right.
supplementary
Yeah,
one? Or,
I
Yes.
think so.
okay, that's fine.
Now, here's another suggestion I had for the water fund. Okay, so since we're going to be spending $425,187 on these meters over the next 2 years, I'm wondering so that we can, if the feds come say, well, now you have to get the money back, I want to say, no, we already have this spent, and it's from the water fund, so one way or the other. I would highly recommend that we use that for that, and or we have these test wells too. So I think we can use up that 488 pretty quick, but I think we should designate it for those 3 things. Because the test well is being done this year, soon, and then we're also spending 200 and some odd thousand for this year on meters, so I think we can use that money up pretty quick.
Good.
And,
And
yeah.
what's the background on the feds asking for money back that they've already allocated?
Well, so apparently, again, this is just kind of there's communities that aren't using the money,
Yeah.
and so their feds are saying, well, if they're not using the money, we should take it back. So I want to make sure that we're using the money.
Yeah, I did ask because I had a couple of questions on the report before I filed it. Must have been a week or 2 ago.
Right.
I did ask the lady or the individual at the League of Minnesota Cities, and she said that's sort of a rumor to not list. I mean,
It is. I know it's
in
a far-fetched-
statute. It's basically
Yeah.
cities have till 2024 to allocate and 2026 to spend. That she couldn't envision a scenario where they would take that back because it's in law or
Right.
whatever.
So I'm just saying, I
Yeah,
don't
no.
think so either. I agree with her, but I'm I just don't think it would hurt to get it
But,
spent.
yeah, no, I think there's multiple places, because even hopefully our 2 new wells should be in place, not, hopefully by the end of the year, actually past the test
Right.
wells, I guess, or,
Right.
So, yeah, I guess, so probably the next step would be just to bring back, even on consent, just to transfer from that special revenue fund to those other funds at one of the next meetings based on
Okay.
that allocation, if everyone's fine, knowing that we can subsequently amend it or whatever, if something changes with the broadband in the near future, so, okay.
Do you know what would, so once we transfer this 300,000, 345 to roads, what would our fund balance in our roads be? Do you know?
It'd be close. I mean, yeah, it would be, I want to say at our last meeting when we had the cash balance on the road.
Would it be around 700?
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
700,000, so it would be
around
about right around $1 million plus or minus, so, yeah.
Okay.
No,
Well-
and that's before, we've got our Jennings project, we've got the overlay
Well, we have the
project.
Jennings project, but what I'm saying, after the Jennings project, we would still have around 700,000, right?
Well, we
Yeah,
have the
'cause, well, we have the
460
taxes
to do
coming in.
the
Yeah.
mill and overlays and that, so,
Oh, 460, okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
we-
with this, it'd be right around 8, I would guess.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Just to give us an idea,
Idea.
all right.
And that's something we'll cover in more depth at the strategy session, right?
Well, the roads when are we bringing the roads back? Because I know we were talking about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've started working on it internally, and I'm evaluating with Gary and Allison the like the road plan that you have adopted, I think, last year. And looking at that, I think that's a really good start. We're almost there, pretty much. I think it's just kind of getting ahead of the curve a little bit on
Right.
some of the projects. So long answer. Sorry on that, but you'll likely see something by June 20th as far as to just kind of look at if there is additional costs. I know tonight we're talking about the Sunnybrook area, and
Right.
there may be some cost savings between the initial painters and the Sunnybrook area discussion. If there's a way, it's all about communicating with the public what we're going to do, right? And these maps and the large area of Minnetrista, it can be complicated to figure out, well, what the heck are we doing next year or the year after? So there's a lot. The one conversation I'd like to have is about an online map that somebody could look at. We could put on our website. You could point citizens to it and say, here it is. It's pretty simple to implement. WSB can definitely do it, but there might be some additional costs to get this really dialed in. One with just the technology piece, and 2 with the additional cores and just prep work that would need to get done to understand the next 3 years of the plan. And really, we'd have to get caught up, and then each subsequent year after this year or next year, we'd just really be doing the year 3 cores. So there'd be a system in place that if we would ever run
We would
into
do cores every year, but the cores would be for the 3rd year out.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Right.
And, Gary's out in the field every day, reporting back, because roads can change pretty quickly over a year, depending on the
Right.
freeze-thaw cycle and the condition of the pavement. I mean, you could have something that's scored pretty high on the pavement condition index, and then 1 year goes by and it just gets blown up. So, we have boots on the ground to make those calls. So really, it's this exercise of looking at it annually, allocating more time, resources to developing a better plan, and then communicating that plan. How do we do that with the public? Because I think I hear it, just in my short time here, people wanting to know when their road's going to get done.
Right.
What's the plan? And really, the vision is every road has a plan. Every road section has a plan, either for projects or for maintenance. And simple way is, point somebody to a map. They can start playing around on the map on their computer and figure out what the plan is for every road in town. And then our great staff would be the ones that would get the job of updating that every year and making sure that City Council adopts that every year and everybody knows what's going on. And then really Brian steps in and he pairs it with how much can we spend each year, because I'll tell you up front, you're going to have a need that exceeds the financial capabilities of the city. So then you have to be thoughtful about what you do, and then we'll have conversations about, do we want to, package projects together and sell a bond to do those projects, maybe a larger project every 2 years or 3 years, kind of getting into a system that'll over time set up our bond schedule that it's laddered in that sense, and every year, in 15 or 20 years, you'll have a bond that falls off that you can replace with continued maintenance. It's just a cycle. So getting into that cycle is challenging. It takes a lot of time. It takes decades really if you have a 15 or 20 year bond sale or
When we talk about that, I think it would be good too to talk about what is a good percentage of debt that the city. I know we're fairly low right now, and I know at one time.
Yeah, I mean, we're at our total debt now is like 19 million for and about 11 of that is utilities or water, 11,
right.
12, and the other 7 or so is the building or the police building,
Right.
and then some road projects and stuff. So
if you take out the utilities, which is separate, if you will,
yeah,
and you do road projects and building projects,
7, 8 million.
is that how healthy is that? I mean, what's a healthy debt load for a city our size and for a budget our size? It'd be good to know.
And
I think we're fine as far as debt. It's just philosophically, obviously, the debt needs to be paid through taxes. And I think the last so many years we've concentrated on getting out that cash levy per year up, and now that we've maybe done a good job at that, maybe now that's some of it can be debt levy versus levy that's sort of annual ongoing. It's definitely something to look at or think about.
And I'll tell you, what you're going to find is it's all over the board. Some cities bond like you wouldn't believe, and some have no bonded debt. So it's all kind of personal preference of the community and what they're willing to do. So, there isn't like an easy formula. There won't be an easy formula to say, a city of 8,000 people of this size with this many roads should have this much bonded debt related to roads. It all varies.
The only thing statutorily, I think, is just the 3% of market value or something.
Yeah.
So that's like $60 million, and we'd have a lot of ways to go before we reach where the state says you've got too much debt. So, but that would be the only, I guess, real threshold as far as that would be upon us from another entity, or whatever. So,
Now, does that include utilities?
I think that's more just utility bonds would be excluded from that. So
Okay.
So we have we're clear about 60 million of what we could issue. Obviously we're not looking to do that. We got 20 million.
I don't think any of us would be sitting here.
No.
If we did that.
So
So going back to the roads that we should be planning for next year, what are we looking at for starting to really nail down what we want to do for next year? So we can get the bids out there for January. That's always been a goal. I mean, recently more so.
Yep, and Gary could probably speak more intelligently on this, but next year is basically mill and overlays projected, so that's a good thing. So a little bit less engineering involved with that. We still need to get, I think, cores for some of the areas. From what I've gathered from my conversations with Allison, is that we're on schedule to get that bidding done in January. The roads that were adopted to do last year are kind of the ones that are slated to happen in 2023. So, but we're going to look at it again with this exercise to just confirm that and look at the PCI. I think the PCI happens next year again.
2 years, yeah.
2 years, so it was last year. So, it'll be mostly taking last year's PCI ratings and then Gary and Allison coming up with package projects and figure that out. So we're on track for January bidding, and because it's a mill and overlay year, we'll call it, next year, we do have it's like almost perfect timing to develop this more robust plan.
Mm-hmm.
So then
Well,
we'd be
that's
looking
kinda
at bonding for the bigger projects in 2024.
If we wanted to, yeah. And we should start thinking about those now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like how, I guess my question would be how much would we bond for? Like so we know how many projects we do versus, how few.
That'll be a discussion amongst city council as far as what you want to do. A lot of it is what makes sense. What projects, what roads are in the same general area to help with packaging the project and helping with mobilization costs and things like that. So they'll have to look at that.
Kind of like what we did for hard scrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge. Kind of put them together. And same with the year before we did Shady and we did those over there. So, those three together. So we'd probably do something like that.
Well,
Yep.
we could bond for different areas and just break up the bids, though, too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You could just package it in one financing package. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, it could be several $1 million depending on how aggressive. $3, $5, $6 million, and we have the $10 million exemption per year.
What's the biggest bond we've ever done for roads? Was that Halstead?
Yeah, I think so. I was going to say that was $3+ million or whatever. Yeah. So.
You're going to have to keep North Arm right up there. I have a husband
Yeah.
who keeps saying at the top of his lungs, I'm going to get that councilwoman that's on the council, and she had better do something about my road.
Yeah.
Well, we do need to look at North Arm. I know you know that. It's pretty bad. But I don't know that we can do it as an MSA, so we'll have to look at that. I don't think so. So that
If
might
we
be...
don't we risk losing the MSA dollars allocated for that?
No, we just have to designate other roads as
Other roads.
MSA roads. So.
Right, but Allison said we only have so many options that we can designate based on how the roads are here and how they're set up.
Correct. I mean, it had to be connector to highway or state highway to county road to county road, or between the two. I mean, Halstead falls into it because of the county road to the county road connection or state on the other end.
But
So
Highland would qualify. Deer Creek would qualify. I'm trying to think of some other ones that would qualify.
Morning View?
she was actually going to check into how much maintenance falls into the MSA dollars too that we could use for mill and overlay.
So he's got a request today for
Right.
that.
So I have a question. Ann just mentioned, what about Morning View? Because it does go like this. Does that qualify as the MSA road?
Boy, I don't think so because of the traffic count. I think the traffic count will be too low. I mean, a lot of ours are pretty low, but I mean, that's a residential neighborhood, so it's not like,
Not like
an artery or a collector road as we consider it.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. All right. Yeah, that would be good. West Branch. You might be able to do something on West Branch, not the whole thing, but a portion of it. I know that people have mentioned from 26 would be south, where Duchesne Lane is. It's so weird because from 26 to Duchesne, it's gravel, and then Duchesne is paved. So maybe doing a section of West Branch or North Branch, I'm not sure what it is called up there, but
And if I may add, the state aid dollars are only a small portion of the actual funding needed for it. They don't ever give us enough to do the actual whole project, but it does subsidize it or supplement it.
well, if you do, it depends. If you do just a section, like it was enough to do the Sunnyfield project that we did because we only did this much of a 2-mile stretch or whatever, so we could do something like that. But we can't do North Arm with MSA because even if you just do so much, they will expect you eventually to finish it off, and we can't with MSA standards. So, but that might be one we could group together with Morning View. That road over there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else? With that, then, we can have a half-hour adjournment. All right. You do such a good job on your presentations and information that we get through this fast. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Kathleen. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ann. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. We are adjourned.